Greetings, everybody. Welcome to week 35 of the Bible in 365. It's Worship in the Park weekend, so I hope that a little bit later this morning, I'll be able to see you out at Cranberry Community Park at 10:30 for our annual outdoor worship service and church-wide picnic. It's a beautiful Sunday morning, so we're looking forward to that. But before we do that, I want to share with you a little preview of this week's readings in the Bible. It's kind of an interesting week because we're actually going to be in four different biblical books this week. So we're going to finish our third section of readings through the Psalms, and then we're going to turn our attention to two short letters of Paul in the New Testament, the letters of Titus and Philemon. And then we'll end the week by getting started in the book of Proverbs, which will be our primary reading next week. So let's just take a moment to talk a little bit about first the letter of Titus. The letter of Titus is a short letter, only 3 chapters long, but it is written by the Apostle Paul to a man named Titus. And Titus was a Gentile convert to the faith who became an associate of Paul. And he traveled with Paul on his missionary journeys to Ephesus. He was sent by Paul to the city of Corinth to help support ministry there. And then, when Paul went to the island of Crete to introduce the Christian faith, he left Titus behind as kind of the founding pastor of the church in Crete. Now, so Paul's left Titus there to kind of organize the church, to raise up leaders, and to begin to get some structure around the community of Christ followers on Crete. But it proves to be a particularly challenging task for Titus because Crete is an immoral society. And throughout the island, there's dishonesty, there's gluttony, there's laziness, and there's these false teachings that have arisen about the gospel, these misunderstandings about what these new Christians are all about. And so in this letter, what Paul is doing is he's giving instruction to Titus. He's helping Titus think through how he would identify people that would be good elders to lead the church. He's giving him wisdom for how to respond to false teachings. He's giving him instructions for Christian living. And so when you read Titus, it's kind of the same genre of letter as the letters to Timothy. It's Paul writing to one of his understudies or mentees in the ministry. It's a very powerful letter, and I hope that you'll find great wisdom in it. Now, after spending a day reading reading Titus, we'll then turn the page and we'll read Paul's letter to another man named Philemon. Now, Philemon is a very short book. It's only 25 verses long, but this short letter is really powerful. It was written while Paul was in prison, probably in Rome. And it was written to a man named Philemon. And Philemon was a Christian who was also a slave owner. And he owned a slave named Onesimus. And Onesimus had stolen from Philemon and then run away. And to steal from an owner and run away was a crime punishable by death in first century Roman law. Now, when Onesimus runs away, he actually encounters Paul and Paul's preaching ministry. And Onesimus is moved by the gospel message to convert to the Christian faith. And so he becomes a believer in Christ, and he decides that he wants to return home to Philemon to make things right. And so the letter of Philemon is Paul's appeal to Philemon to receive Onesimus as a brother in Christ, to forgive him of the crime of the past, to acknowledge that he's been changed by Jesus, and because he's been changed, to receive him as a brother in Christ, and to not exercise his right to have Onesimus executed. Now, on one level, this is a very powerful letter. It's a letter that talks about the change that Christ can work in us and how we should view others who have been changed by Christ. The challenge of the letter is that it takes for granted the first century slave culture of the Roman world. The purpose of the letter is not to address the morality of whether or not owning slaves in the first century was a good idea. It just assumes slave ownership because that was just a part of life in the first century. Instead, the focus of the letter is on how individual believers like Philemon and Onesimus ought to see, treat, and value each other as siblings in Christ. We'll end the week by reading the first 4 chapters of the book of Proverbs. Now, next week, I'll share with you a lot more detail about the book of Proverbs, But just to get you started, I'll say a few things. So, Proverbs is the beginning of a poetic section of Old Testament writings that are often known as the wisdom literature. Wisdom is practical knowledge, and wisdom is kind of the art of how you steer through the twists and turns of life. And so, Proverbs is the opening of the wisdom literature that provides very practical guidance on how to handle everyday life issues. It starts with calling us to fear the Lord, and then we get instructions that should shape the way we think about parenting and marriage and how we relate to neighbors and friends. Now, tradition holds that most of the book of Proverbs is written by King Solomon, who was known for his great wisdom. And Proverbs 1:1 does attribute the book to Solomon. But as we read Proverbs, we'll notice that there are other authors who contribute to Proverbs, that Proverbs is actually a collection of wisdom sayings that come from a variety of places that are written by a variety of people, and that the Proverbs are brought together to provide practical guidance and wisdom for how to live a godly life. So again, we'll say much more about Proverbs next week, but for now, that should be enough to get you started. All right, I pray that you have a great week. I look forward to seeing many of you at the park in just a little bit, and I'll see you right back here next week as we continue our readings in the Bible in 365.